Where am I from? Now, this is a question that I have grown to love and detest. I love it because I love the air of mystery that it provides. I hate it because it says that I'm foreign and I don't belong here, wherever here may be. For the next few minutes, I'm going to take you on a personal life journey of mine. I apologize if it sounds narcissistic, but if you stay with me, you will see there is a method to my madness. Long time ago, I was born in the city of Karachi in Pakistan to a lovely set of parents. My father was a young, handsome, bold, extroverted Air Force officer. My mother was exactly the opposite and an introvert. When I was born, my father proclaimed to my grandfather, which was my dad's dad, that I am going to celebrate my daughter's birth by distributing laddus, which is sweets. My grandfather, who was a sophisticated, educated man, was still very much a traditionally Pakistani man. He said, "That's unheard of. Traditionally, we don't do that." My father proclaimed, "Why not? This is my daughter, it is my happiness, and laddus I shall distribute." And so he did. I had been barely on this earth for a few hours, and I was already smashing patriarchy. Although I think the credit for that goes to my father. So kudos to him for being the original pink laddu pioneer. So I was born in a family as the first grandchild on my dad's side of the family, and I was born in a household of many uncles. I was loved, I was spoiled, and I grew up with a lot of banter with these uncles. I think it actually ended up shaping who I became many years later. A few years of being the only child, this guy joined me as my younger brother. I had now lost the limelight. Barely a year and a half had gone by when he was followed by this guy. I was no longer center stage. I had to share the limelight, and it became very evident at a young age to me that I was now a role model. The same year that Mohib was born was also the year that I started school. My father recalls a story that when he dropped me off at school, I didn't even look back or cry, just give him a kiss, went in, and went my merry way. Apparently, I was very eager for education. Being in the Air Force, our lives were constantly in flux. We moved from city to city and didn't stay static in one place. A few more years of this, and these three stooges were finally joined by our youngest sister, Mahavish. I was no longer the golden daughter. I was excited, I was overjoyed because I always wanted a sister. But Mavish wanted nothing to do with me because she was a mommy's girl. A few years later, when I was a young teenager, she would follow me around, and I wanted nothing to do with her at that time. The same year that Mavish was born is the year that my dad left the Pakistani Air Force and decided to look for opportunities outside of Pakistan. In 1993, we moved to a small island of Bahrain. I was enrolled in a school called Pakistan Urdu School, but don't let the name fool you because none of us were allowed to speak in Urdu on playgrounds or in class other than in Urdu classes. I didn't like this policy because I quite loved the Urdu language. This was the first time I felt my identity being threatened as a Pakistani. The 4 years in Bahrain were interesting. I participated in school events and speech contests and academic undertakings, and life was going really well. In 1996, we as a family had an opportunity to perform Hajj. I had refused to buy an abaya before we went on to Hajj, and I insisted that I will only wear the scarf and a chadar or a shawl. Before going for Hajj, I made the intention that I will actually start wearing the hijab, because someone told me, an auntie in the community, that once you perform Hajj, hijab becomes mandatory. I was a young girl, and see, this is how we sort of learn deen in the South Asian community often, from the elders. My first day in Medina, as I was walking in the bazaar with my family, I was groped by a man. I immediately blamed myself because I was not wearing an abaya, and I insisted with my mother to take me shopping for an abaya. I now recognize that that had nothing to do with me or what I was wearing. But even at that young age, I had been indoctrinated with the cultural baggage that the way that I dressed is what provoked the violation of my body by a complete stranger. That same year, my father's application to Canada was accepted, and we set on another journey. Before heading off, we spent a few months in Pakistan to spend time with our family. My father thought it would be a good idea to enroll us into an Islamic school instead of wasting time just sitting at home. I was actually excited because my education in Bahrain from a Quran teacher was in a very loving environment because she didn't tell us the 1,001 ways to go to hell, but indoctrinated a love of the Quran in my heart. But see, the school in Pakistan was very different. I remember this one incident where we were sitting with the Quran teacher, my brothers and I, and my brother was wearing a sweater that had a basketball figure on it, a man shooting hoops. And she goes to him, "This is haram, don't wear this again." She then turned her attention to me and my long nails and says, "You need to cut your nails, you shouldn't be keeping long nails, because when you go to hell, your nails will be made of hellfire." What I thought was really interesting was the presumption that in her mind I was already hellbound. See, this is not the last time I would encounter the haram police. To this day, I continue to fight that. A few months later, we flew and landed in Vancouver, in Canada, in the midst of the worst storm in 40 years. I had never seen snow, and this was my first experience of a winter wonderland. Moving to Canada was very difficult because, as you realize, I'd moved already once, and this was the second time I was leaving my best friends behind. My first school was in a small town of Mission, BC, where I was not only the first Muslim girl, but the only hijabi girl as well. In that school, I was well received, loved, and respected. Few months later, we had to move cities, and we moved into a more metropolitan city. Before that, I'd like to actually share a story of a classmate who asked me, how do you speak English so well? And me, being snarky, replied, "Do you not know that English is a universal language?" This became the first time I dealt with the stereotypes that immigrants cannot speak English. I guess I have my principal to thank for who had a no Urdu policy in school for my fluency in English. Once I moved into the metropolitan school, I had a harder time adjusting in a multi-ethnic, multi-faith school because I was teased and treated badly by a few students. I suffered in silence, never shared this story with my family or my siblings or my friends, but I do recall writing a lot of emo poetry during that time. Within the first few months of being there, I had eventually made friends and had a group, which gave me the confidence to not feel bullied or be bullied. I was a good student. I was an active participant in the student school council and many other extracurricular activities. I joined the Royal Canadian Air Cadets. I had won many speech contests, had an opportunity to fly in a Cessna and gliders, go skiing, do survival skills camp, which ultimately led to a small scholarship towards university from the Air Cadets. All these experiences helped shape my confidence. I joined university and finally graduated with a degree in communications after many years and many major changes. That multidisciplinary approach provided me the skills, critical skills, and analytical skills. I worked in politics, broadcasting, and print media before I got married in 2009 and moved to New York. The time in New York was a difficult time as I couldn't work due to my visa status there as a dependent. So what I tried was to see if I can line an employer who would hire me and do the visa. So I interviewed and auditioned with a couple of the biggest Pakistani channels that were based in New York. In both the interviews, I was asked, do you always keep your hijab on? In one of them, I responded, thinking it was a smart response, yeah, I do, but I can change the style up every now and then. In another one, I found when I was auditioning, two of the producers actually were joking that when you appear on camera, you may leave our audiences confused as to whether you're here to blow up the set or host the show. Moments like these leave you speechless, no matter how articulate or verbose you are. See, I have this silly notion that people should not be judged on their outer appearances, ethnic, race, sexuality, sex, or anything like that, but on merit. 6 years ago, life brought me to London. It took me about a year and a half to find a job. Currently, I'm a civil servant. Now, I tried to pursue a career in writing, didn't find anything paid, so currently my writing is limited to being a Facebook warrior. The point of taking you on this journey was to show you how being a Pakistani-Canadian who is nearly British, I belong everywhere and yet nowhere. All of us in this room have multi-hyphenated identities. Having had the vast experiences that I have been privileged with in life has allowed me an opportunity for a broader understanding of the world and humans. As part of my continued journey, I founded my organization called Uplift Connections. I now aspire to launch a YouTube channel to share some of my life's vast experiences. You can follow me on my social media to see how I do with that. In my many years on this earth, I've constantly defined and redefined my identities. I've struggled with controversial Islamic concepts, especially in regards to being a Muslim woman. I've gone from someone who believed that you got harassed because of what you wear to believing that we have the right to safety irrespective of what we wear. From believing that hijab is mandatory to now believing that there's actually a lot more room for nuances and actually a question mark on whether it is compulsory. My Muslim identity is also fluid and constantly evolving. I'm learning and relearning what it means to be Muslim, a woman, and also what it means to be Pakistani, Canadian, almost British Muslim in the world today. I'm constantly balancing my identity, even within the context of my family. What it means to be a daughter, what it means to be a sister, what it means to be a wife. The constant changing of identity becomes even more relevant today when we have the Home Secretary setting a precedent by revoking the citizenship of a British citizen and rendering her stateless. This is now not how I had initially intended to end my talk. But in a world of Brexit, Islamophobia, anti-immigration rhetoric, racism, and anti-Semitism, my multi-hyphenated identities, which I've always found to be my strength, make me feel vulnerable and wondering, where do I ultimately belong? Both sets of my grandparents immigrated to Pakistan after the partition in 1947. I have lived in 5 different countries, so I call myself a transgenerational perpetual immigrant. And being an immigrant is actually a very deep-rooted part of my identity. I feel neither fully Pakistani or fully Canadian or fully British, nor am I fully traditional or conservative or liberal or moderate Muslim. All the parts of my identity form the whole of who I am today. I am the culmination of the many. Thank you.